President, Sheriff Mike Leaholt, Hughes County, South Dakota. Second Vice President, Sheriff John Aubrey, Jefferson County, Kentucky. Third Vice President, Sheriff Danny Glick, Laramie County, Wyoming. Secretary, Sheriff Greg Champagne, St. Charles Parish, Louisiana. Treasurer, Sheriff Harold Evanson, Rockwell County, Texas. Sergeant at Arms, Sheriff John Layton, Marion County, Indiana. The immediate past President, Sheriff Paul Fitzgerald, Story County, Iowa. And immediate past President, Sheriff B.J. Roberts, City of Hampton, Virginia, immediate past President. There will be one person speaking at this press conference. That will be Sheriff Larry Emerson, Calhoun County, Alabama. After he finishes his remarks, we will have about 10 to 15 minutes questions from the press. He is the only one that will be answering questions. I will cut the press conference off when I think it's appropriate. The press will be able to speak to any and all sheriffs, either in this room afterwards or outside. That having said, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the President of the National Sheriff's Association, Sheriff Larry Emerson, Calhoun County, Alabama.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for those who are in attendance. Most especially, thank you to the Sheriffs of America for your voice, your input, and your concern for the people of your counties, because we do represent the people of America. And we have been working hard to deal with the issues we face today. And through the efforts of many, we've come up with some points that we think are important to be considered. We've tried to clarify our position on a number of issues and to focus the conversation in the direction we think is the best path to the future. We have a resolution, and bear with me, we provided copies, but I would like to read that into the record. Whereas the elected sheriff is recognized throughout the United States as the chief law enforcement officer and is directly accountable to the people through the electoral process. Whereas all sheriffs take an oath of office to enforce and defend the United States Constitution and the state constitution and their laws. Whereas, as a primary mission of sheriffs is to ensure public safety. Whereas, gun safety is vitally important to our nation's public health and the 3,080 sheriffs of this nation. Whereas, the cause of violence, including gun violence, must be addressed on many fronts, including improved mental health treatment, violence in the media, drugs, gangs, the breakdown of the family, strengthening our laws that prevent or reduce access of legally prohibited persons from firearms, and the vigorous enforcement of the law. Whereas the National Sheriff's Association represents the interest of all sheriffs who are sworn to support and defend the Constitution. Whereas the sheriffs strongly support our citizens' right, protected right, to bear arms under the Second Amendment, and the National Sheriff's Association does not support any laws that deprive the citizen of the rights provided under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Whereas the doctrine of judicial review grants to the United States Supreme Court and the lower courts the power to determine the constitutionality of any law, and sheriffs do not possess the legal authority to interpret the constitutionality of any law. Now therefore, be it resolved that the National Sheriff's Association supports the rights conferred by the Second Amendment and further recognizes the ultimate authority of the courts in interpreting the scope of those constitutional rights. Now, we've done more work, and we have much more work to be done, but there's a list of points that we think must be focused on for this conversation, and we must convey that to the folks in our Congress and our state houses to have a conversation on issues that we can impact. One, the rule of law. That our nation's sheriffs recognize the rule of law in the United States, in which the Supreme Court and lower courts are the ultimate authority in determining the constitutionality of any law. In the Second Amendment, our nation's sheriffs, support and are sworn to uphold the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment. We must have a comprehensive approach to the problems we have. Gun control alone will not solve the problems of guns and extreme violence. Society needs a thoughtful and comprehensive approach to this many-faceted problem. Records access. Law enforcement must have access to relevant records to determine whether a person is legally prohibited from possession of firearms by major improvement in the National Instant Check System. Mental health records. Law enforcement must have access to the mental health records for accurate background checks for responding to 911 calls and responding to those who suffer from mental illness. Mental health treatment. There must be great expansion of the treatment resources to those who experience mental illness. We have an epidemic of untreated persons and mental illness across the country, and there is a strong link between untreated mental illness and the increased risk of committing violent crimes. Vigorous prosecution. The nation's sheriffs support the vigorous prosecution of those who violate existing gun laws, including enhanced sentences for those violations. Gun safety initiatives. The nation's sheriff support enhanced firearm safety efforts, including incentives to promote both safe and secure storage and use of firearms. Training. The nation's sheriffs support enhanced training, best practices, policies, and procedures, and adequate resources for law enforcement, schools, and those who operate other public facilities to address active shooters and other safety threats. And the culture of violence. The nation's sheriffs recognize the culture of violence on the internet, on television, in movies, especially violent video games, that they have a negative influence on our nation's youth. In schools, this is last, but is by no means least. The nation's sheriffs are committed to protecting our children in their neighborhoods and in their school facilities. This is our prepared statement. As was mentioned, we're ready to take questions from you, if you will.
Sir.